Welcome back to Ghost Pirate Entertainment. I'm your host, Kanan Becker, and today we talk about the 10 worst horror movies of 2023. So before we get into this, I just want to preface this by saying I don't normally hate on movies, and to be honest, the first half of this list, I don't really hate either. They're not the greatest movies, but they're also not horrible either. But the second half, that's a different story. Those are movies that I really despise. Also, to let you guys know, as far as the worst, I only talk about movies that I saw in theaters, because if I were to go into streaming and this and that, you can get really in the weeds of that. There's a lot of really low budget, just awful movies that are released to VOD all the time. So I'm only talking about movies that I personally was able to go see in a theater. And with that, let's get to the list.
When you awaken the dead, the further you travel, the riskier your journey will become.
Insidious: The Red Door is a 2023 supernatural horror movie, directed by Patrick Wilson in his directorial debut, from a screenplay by Scott Teems, and based on a story by Lee Winnell. It's a direct sequel to Insidious Chapter 2, and the fifth installment in the Insidious franchise. It stars Patrick Wilson, Rose Byrne, and Ty Simpkins. The Lambert family is back and must go deeper into the further than ever before to put their demons to rest once and for all.
I'm seeing crazy stuff. I think these drawings could be clues from my past.
There's so much you don't know. And I was too scared to tell you the truth.
This movie isn't what I would consider horrible by any means. I mean, it was one of the highest grossing horror movies this year. It made over 100 million. I mean, that's not shabby. My big issue with it is it just didn't bring anything. It didn't bring anything interesting or new. It just felt like a rinse repeat in so many ways. Like, if you've seen the other Insidious movies, you've seen pretty much everything they had to offer in this. Beyond that, it just had a lot of cheap jump scares and no real meat on the bone when it comes to the story. It also had a huge lull in the middle of this movie where it just drags, and I just was looking at my watch going, what is going on here? Let's get going. And as much as I do think Patrick Wilson did a pretty good job directing this, especially for his first film, that was one of the things where I saw, a little bit of a rookie director kind of thing going on. But my biggest issue, like I said, is with the story, and that's on Scott Teems. He will make another appearance on this list. He's not my favorite writer right now. I'm not a big fan of the way he writes dialogue and the way his stories, the way they go in general. But I get its success, because if you just want a popcorn kind of horror movie, it's fun. It's nothing reinventing the wheel, but it's all right. So I get why people went and saw it. But I definitely think it was one of the weaker movies that I saw this year. The Nun 2 is a 2023 gothic supernatural horror movie, directed by Michael Chavez with a screenplay by Ian B. Goldberg, Richard Nang, and Akela Cooper. It serves as a sequel to The Nun from 2018 and is the 9th installment in the Conjuring universe. It stars Thaisa Farmiga, Jonas Bloquet, Bonnie Aarons, and Storm Reed. In 1956 France, a priest is murdered and evil is spreading, so the church asks Sister Irene to face Valak once again.
What did you see?
I saw a nun.
A lot of the same things I said about Insidious: The Red Door, I'm going to say about this one. It just didn't bring anything that unique, surprising. It just felt a lot like rinse, repeat. So many of these horror movies that are coming out now, one, they rely on so much CGI, and that just really takes me out of it. I'm a practical guy. I am okay when CGI is blended in and used correctly, but when it is basically what your monster is, that just kind of drives me crazy. And Valak does look pretty good in a lot of this movie, and Bonnie Aarons does a fantastic job playing it again. The whole cast, I thought, was really good in this. They just didn't have a lot to work with. It felt dry. It felt boring. It just felt very clinical. and like all it had to really scare you was jump scares again. It just didn't have a solid story. There wasn't anything of substance to the story again. But it does look gorgeous. Like, it's super well shot, just absolute gorgeous cinematography. But like I said, it just is boring and just didn't do anything special. I do think it's better than the first, but only by a little bit. And I wasn't a fan of that movie either. So this isn't a movie I hate, but I do think it deserves a spot as my number 9 pick on this list. Innismen is a 2022 British experimental folk horror movie. Shot, composed, written, and directed by Mark Jenkins. It stars Mary Woodvine, Edward Rowe, and Flo Crow. Set in 1973 on an uninhabited island off the Cornish coast, a wildlife volunteer's daily observations of a rare flower turn into a metaphysical journey that forces her as well as the viewer to question what is real and what is a nightmare. As interesting as that premise sounds, and as much as I really appreciate experimental film, I just did not connect with this one. This is one of the most boring movies I've seen, because there's other movies that were experimental this year, but I at least found things in those that I understood, that I connected with, that may not be my cup of tea, but I at least kind of got what they were going for. This one, just the way that it's put together, it's so dry and so slow. Nothing really happens, and even when it does, you're just like, okay, like, there's not a real big payoff that makes it worth that hour and a half that you put in. Whereas movies like The Outwaters, even though I get a lot of people hated it, it had a payoff, and it has some very extreme moments, and I was able to at least get what they were going for in it. The same goes for Skinamarink. It's another controversial movie that a lot of people hated, but I do understand what they were trying to go for, and I did feel some of that from it. And this isn't a horrible movie. Like I said, the first half of this list are not movies that I hate, and I just did not connect with this movie. It is cool looking. There's a lot of thought and care and passion in it. I can see all that, but it just didn't work for me, so I had to put it on here.
You be safe now.
Please.
It's a Wonderful Knife is a 2023 Christmas comedy slasher. Directed by Tyler McIntyre and written by Michael Kennedy. It stars Jane Woodop, Justin Long, Joel McHale, and Catherine Isabel. After saving her town from a psychotic killer, Winnie Carruthers' life is less than wonderful. When she wishes she had never been born, she finds herself in a nightmare parallel universe where without her, things could be much, much worse.
Everyone would be better off if I was never born. Did you see that? Did the power go out? Oh my god.
Another movie I didn't hate. I did have fun with this, but it just felt cheap. It just felt shoddily put together. I mean, you could feel that some people were trying. I really like what Justin Long did. It's over the top, it's silly, but I did have fun with it. But just this dialogue, the dialogue just does not work in this. This is not how people talk. Because when a movie is more worried about checking the boxes and trying to be politically correct and all of that kind of stuff, it loses its heart in a lot of ways, and you're not focused on the right things. This just felt kind of like a little bit of a cash grab. I mean, not over the top in that regard, but it just didn't feel like they had the time to really develop the story. They had the time to really put into this to make it something special. And it's a real shame because the concept of it could really work. I'd love to see this idea developed and made into something that could be this seasonal thing like we saw in the movie Thanksgiving this year. But just unfortunately, it just didn't work for me, and that's why it's here.
Played a trick on you.
The Exorcist Believer is a 2023 supernatural horror movie. Directed by David Gordon Green with a story by Scott Teems, Danny McBride, and Green. It's the 6th installment in the Exorcist franchise and serves as a direct sequel to The Exorcist from 1973. It stars Leslie Odom Jr., Lydia Jewett, and Olivia O'Neill. When two girls disappear into the woods and return 3 days later with no memory of what happened to them, the father of one of the girls seeks out Chris McNeil, who was forever altered by what happened to her daughter 50 years ago.
Angela, can you tell your dad how long you were gone?
A few hours.
Baby, you've been gone 3 days.
All right, so this is the first one that starts to dip into me really disliking it. And I don't hate this like a lot of people. I did think there was some qualities to it. For one, the first half of this movie, I was digging it. I was like, all right, I'm with this. I think this might actually be something worth watching. And then about the halfway point, it just starts to really take a nosedive. And it got more and more cheesy, more and more campy, where they were just shoving, not campy in a good way though, where they were just shoving in fan service, just constantly like trying to force it and make it work, but not well written at all. And then completely wasted your legacy character. Like, she's completely wasted in this movie, not even really used. She's in the hospital for 99.9% of it. It's ridiculous. It was so like just shoved in, made no sense. And then at the end, there's another scene that's just shoved in that I thought was even worse. The whole Exorcist scene at the end I thought was so stupid. It wasn't explained enough. You don't care about any of these characters. They bring in all these different people from different faiths, which I think could be a good idea, but we don't know who any of them are, don't know any of their backgrounds, and don't give a flying fuck about any of them. So you took a movie that had potential and just completely wasted it. So there is no point in all this hype to bring back The Exorcist when you're going to do nothing new with it at all. They didn't add anything to the franchise, didn't add any ideas. It's just really a mess, and was not a movie I'm a fan of at all, as you can tell. But like I said, I didn't hate it like everybody else. I thought the acting was really, really good, especially from your core cast. I thought they were exceptional, especially the two little girls. They were fantastic. It looks great. I mean, that's one thing you can always count on David Gordon Green to bring a pretty quality looking movie. I mean, he did that with Halloween. Even if I didn't like all those Halloweens, they all looked great. And the pacing, the editing is all right. There's a few things I was like, but mostly it's just the story. It was stale, nothing original. And what they did do was just shoved in there. Once again, it feels like a team of people trying to write a movie, and they just don't come together. I don't understand why Danny McBride and Scott Teems and Green continue to work together. They just don't work. I mean, like I said earlier, I'm not a fan of Scott Teems. Like, everything I've seen him do is subpar. It just, I hate throwing anyone under a bus. I'm not that kind of person. I've never made a movie, and so the fact that they make movies is amazing. But it is my job to give my opinion and tell you guys what I think. And I just feel like this is a huge wasted opportunity, huge wasted amount of money. It just could have been something, and instead it ended up just being this. So it definitely fits on my list because it was a movie I really did not care for this year.
Children of the Korn.
Children of the Korn is a 2020 supernatural slasher, written and directed by Kurt Wimmer. It's the third adaptation of Stephen King's short story, Children of the Korn, and the 11th installment in the Children of the Korn series. It stars Elena Kaporis, Kate Moyer, and Kellen Mulvey. The film describes the events leading up to and including the massacre of the adults of a small town in Nebraska by their children, after the adults irresponsibly ruined the crop and the children's future.
He who walks. He talked to me. He took care of me. So now I'm going to take care of him.
Like killing all the adults?
For starters.
All right, I could not stand this movie. It's bad on every level to me. It's not the worst thing I've seen this year. There's other ones that are worse, trust me. But there was just not a lot here that was worth seeing. And it makes sense because this movie was made in 2020 and then just shelved. And they just kind of threw it out there. I don't know how it ended up in theaters. And movies like this drive me crazy when they make it into theaters, because every year there's a bunch of other great movies that never even get a look at throwing them in theaters. Nothing. They just get thrown on a streaming somewhere and forgotten. And a movie like this makes it into theaters. It's just maddening, frustrating. I don't understand, but we see it every single year. But the dialogue and the story is so bad in this. You could tell the cast was trying their best to work with what they were given, but there's so many silly choices, just goofy moments. There's a lot of stuff in it that's obviously shot during the pandemic where there should be a lot more people around and there's no one, and you're just like, these kids are supposed to be massacring this town of adults, but where are all the kids, or where are all the adults? Like, it just feels awkward. And I just don't understand why they didn't change some things around to make some of that stuff work. Use CGI to put people or do something. But there's just so many things in it. So many just goofy ass scenes. Things that just make you cringe, like beyond cringe. There's so many I can't even get into it. There's a scene where the adults get buried and the mom's hand is just left out with a ring. The way it's done is so campy. The daughter comes up and just takes the ring. It's so dumb because the parents, if her hand could be out of the thing, right, she could climb out. Like, there's so many things like that that make no sense. There's a CGI type of monster, which is a real shame because they did have kind of a cool idea, I think, that Children of the Corn should have done. It's, you know, the whole saying of he who walks behind the rose or whatever. And they actually bring this creature to life. And the idea is great, but the monster looks so dumb. And the whole part of the movie where it is in it is just so bad. This movie, it just frustrated me so much. It's just boring and not entertaining. I found myself looking at my phone, you know, what time is it? How soon is this going to be over? And anytime I'm in a theater and that happens, that's not a good sign. So yeah, I am definitely not a fan of this one.
It's starting to happen. Can you feel it, James? Can you feel it?
Nefarious is a 2023 independent horror movie, written and directed by Chuck Kozelman and Carrie Solomon, and is based on Steve Deace's 2016 novel, A Nefarious Plot. It stars Jordan Belfi and Sean Patrick Flannery. On the day of his scheduled execution, a convicted serial killer gets a psychiatric evaluation, during which he claims to be a demon.
Edward? I'm gonna ask you some questions. I'm not Edward. I'm a demon. Demons aren't really a thing.
This is not a horror movie, guys. Like, I called it that because that's how it's listed on IMDb, but that's probably at least one of my top problems with this movie is the way it's been promoted. The fact that it's being talked about like a horror movie and put in horror movie circles. This is not a horror movie. This is a religious movie. It's a religious group of people. If you look into them, that's the kind of movies they make. They make these scaremonger kind of films that are out there trying to scare you into righteousness. And I'm not a big fan of that, but to each their own. Like, I don't care if you want to do that. I don't care if this is a religious movie and shoving religion down your throat. That's fine. I don't care. But don't promote your movie in a lie. Like, don't lie about your film. Everything about the way the trailer was cut, the poster, the way it's been talked about, like, they were straight up trying to trick people into going to see this movie because they wanted to save us unholy, unwashed, heathen horror fans. And seriously, fuck you guys. Like, don't judge me and don't trick me into watching your shit. If I want to hear what you have to say and I want to hear your opinions and beliefs and all that, then come to me and say, hey, do you want to hear them? But tricking me into seeing it, tricking me into trying to change me and whatever, to me, that's just BS. That's not Christian, in my opinion, deceiving people. And on top of all that, when I did my review, I just told my honest opinion. I was attacked for months by supporters of this movie, by quote unquote Christians that called me so many horrible names. And like, dude, I don't have a problem with anybody believing whatever they want to believe. Don't come at me and think you know me or my spirituality or what I believe. Don't come at me just because I watched your movie, didn't feel like it was a horror movie, and just honestly felt like I was being preached at for an hour and 45 minutes. And That's just sad, man. I was not a fan of that. I just think it's not okay. Beyond that, it just is kind of a boring movie, and I've seen it done many, many times. For one, the movie that jumps to mind is the movie Fallen, with Denzel Washington does a very similar plot to this, and it does it way, way better without having to preach at you, and it still gets its message across. This one just sits there, two guys in a room, and literally they just preach for, like I said, an hour and 45 minutes. And it's just not doing anything special. On top of that, I felt kind of offended by Sean Patrick Flannery's performance. He looks like he's portraying a guy that's on the spectrum, and that just made me feel uncomfortable. I don't know if that should be okay to do or not. That's not up to me to say. I just know that it made me feel uncomfortable watching him do this performance of being this person that's on the spectrum that's also a serial killer. Like, it just feels like so cliche, and it's something that really isn't true. If you look into serial killers and you do your research, they're not people on the spectrum, okay? Like, that's just a bad thing to be putting out there into the universe. But these are just my opinions, okay? If you enjoyed this movie, that's cool, man. I just had a problem with them deceiving in their advertising, deceiving in the way it's promoted, and trying to trick people into seeing it. I just think that's bullshit. But either way, like, if you enjoyed it, that's great. I personally did not enjoy it, thought it was boring, and was honestly offended by the way I was treated more than anything after I talked about it in my review. But it's here because it just really doesn't do anything special. It's kind of boring, and they call themselves a horror movie, so I'm going to include it in my horror movie list.
Big ass shark when I see one.
The Black Demon is a 2023 sci-fi horror movie. Directed by Adrian Grunberg from a screenplay by Boise Esquerra. It stars Josh Lucas, Fernanda Urjula, and Julio Cesar Cedillo. Stranded on a crumbling rig in Baja, a family faces off against a vengeful megalodon shark.
What is it?
Protección. Protection from what?
God, this movie is stupid, but not in a good way. When I go see a shark movie, I want something fun. I want something that is going to be, if it's going to not be serious, and it's not going to be like intense and a thrill ride like a lot of other good shark movies we've seen, then it should be silly and campy and goofy. This isn't either, because it tries to be serious, I guess, but there's a lot of campy, over-the-top, not great CGI, really not good dialogue. But my biggest problem with this is, once again, this is another movie that's preaching its agenda. It's trying to shove this ecological agenda down your throat. And it's like, where's the nuance, guys? Like, someone needs to go out there and teach these screenwriters some nuance. There's a way to tell your message. It's not that I'm against the message that these movies are spreading at all, and everybody attacks me like I have a problem with what they're trying to say. That's not it. It's the way it's put in your film. It takes all joy out of it. It takes all the fun and creative entertainment, all of that out of it, and just makes it a boring slog of a watch. Beyond that, there's so many things that just don't make sense. A lot of really major plot holes in it. And I'm normally a big fan of Josh Lucas, but I just did not like him in this, and I don't blame him. It's the script. It's the way his character is written. You are supposed to feel bad for this guy, even though through the entire movie he's a hill. You just don't like him. He's a piece of shit. And yet at the end you're supposed to feel sad or care about what happens to him, and you just don't. And so there's no stakes at all, because you're like, I don't care if he dies. Like I don't really care about this family. There's nothing redeeming about anybody in this movie, really. And it's just, yeah, it's just not a fun movie. It's a boring movie again, and just not well put together. It doesn't look good. The story is very thin, what there is of a story, and the dialogue is just poor at best. And I gotta say, I was really disappointed by this movie, and that's part of why I'm so hard on it, because I was excited that there was a new shark movie coming out in the summer, and I was like, cool, let's go to the movies and see a new shark movie. And it was this, and it was just a huge letdown, because this movie really is not a good one. Pooh Blood and Honey is a 2023 British independent slasher. Edited, produced, written, and directed by Reese Frank Waterfield. It serves as a horror reimagining of the Winnie the Pooh book series. It stars Nikolai Leon, Maria Taylor, and Natasha Ticini. After Christopher Robin abandons them for college, Pooh and Piglet embark on a bloody rampage as they search for a new source of food. I went into this with very low expectations. I expected it to be cheesy and campy and goofy and full of camp and just really not, well put together movie, but still one that would be fun and funny and would have me having a good time with it. And instead, I got a boring, serious movie with zero fun. And it's amazing to me because there were actually some qualities to it. Like, you could tell that some of the people involved in this knew what they were doing. It didn't look the worst. The special effects weren't that bad. Some of the kills weren't that bad. There were some decent ideas here, and in general, it actually looked pretty good. But it just had no fun. There was just nothing of entertainment here. I don't get it. It was just mean and cruel and not entertaining, not enjoyable. The only part of this movie that I did enjoy, that I did dig, was that creepy animated opening. Now, if you were to make a whole movie like that, or include more of that through the movie or something, it would have definitely taken it up a notch. But instead, after that creepy ass opening, the movie just goes into Boringsville, and it's just, it ends and you're just like, really? So they're making a sequel. I just really hope that they learn something from this, but I doubt it because they made a buttload of money on it. And so they're just going to rinse, repeat, because that's what we see in this culture right now of films. Is like, if it makes money, you're going to see it just, done again to death. And it's frustrating. I get it, but it's frustrating, especially because, like I said, when I reviewed this movie, I think there's some talented people involved here. I'd love to see what they would do with a real property, not just trying to make this, this gimmicky thing, but actually try to make a real movie. I think it might work. But there were so many things that held it back because they were trying to make this novelty thing. It just makes no sense. It's supposed to be Winnie the Pooh, but then it's obviously a dude in a mask. It doesn't in any way look like a, and like it tries to say it's like a half human, half animal thing or something. I don't know. But it's obvious it's just dudes running around in masks. And it's like, I think if they just were to make a straight up regular slasher, it would actually be decent. Definitely better than this, but when you go see a Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey movie, you expect it to be silly and there to be fun in it and it make you laugh in a goofy way, and just, there's no joy in this movie. It's just no fun at all, and that sucked. But hopefully the next one is better and they increase that fun factor, because that's what this was severely lacking. But because of that is why it's my number 2 pick. Fear is a 2023 horror movie, directed by Dean Taylor and co-written by Taylor and John Ferry. It stars Joseph Sikora, Andrew Batchelor, and Tip T.I. Harris. A much-needed getaway and celebration weekend turns into a nightmare due to a contagious airborne threat. Oh my God, guys. This is the only one on this list that I can honestly say I hated. I really despise this movie. This movie frustrated me so bad because all the things on this list I've talked about that made a movie not work for me, this has all of them. It's poorly written. The dialogue is atrocious. None of these people feel like real characters at all, and definitely not like real friends at all, and that's rough. You need some chemistry. There's the worst chemistry between this cast I might have ever seen. Okay, so there's that. The way it's shot is not great. It's way too dark in scenes. And when I saw the location, I was excited because it's actually only a few miles up the hill from me where it was shot. And that's just cool. It's a cool old place. It's a great location to shoot a horror movie, but it's not lit well. It's super dark at times and then overexposed at other times. So it just does not look great. The special effects are cheap and shoddy. And the actors, I feel like they were decent with what they had to work with. I didn't have an issue really with any of the actors. They were just miscast and given horrible dialogue. And then beyond that, it's boring. It's a super boring movie where not much of anything happens and people just kind of run around in a circle, so to speak. So it's boring. So it's got that. And then the other worst thing a movie can do, in my opinion, is just try to shove a message and an agenda down your fucking throat. And this makes this new thing, this new pandemic, it doesn't call it COVID, but it's basically somebody's statement of their, agenda about how they felt about the pandemic and all of that. And it's like, dude, like, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear your message of your problems with the way we handled as a country the pandemic and whatever. Like, I just wanted to be entertained. I wanted a fun horror movie that was maybe scary, maybe had something of a horror movie feel to it. And instead you give me this boring movie where not a lot happens and it's really hard to follow. Like, it's really this kind of scrambled mess. On top of that, it's hard to even remember because it's just nothing that really stands out about it. And then on top of that, you're just going to sit there and preach at me your beliefs all day long. And once again, I don't even necessarily disagree with the message or the concept or his ideas that they're trying to say in this. It's just the way they're done and shoved down your throat, and there's no nuance at all to it. It's just awkward feeling. It's just uncomfortable feeling, and not in a good way. Definitely not in an intentional way. It's just not a good movie by any means. It's another one that I'm like, how did this movie get into theaters? It's such a wasted opportunity when there's a dozen movies this year at least that were straight to streaming that I think would have done great in theaters. Like, some of these people should be fired out there in this industry, that they're just driving me crazy. But I'm just a guy on YouTube giving my opinion. These are just my 2 cents. So take them for what they're worth. If you enjoyed some of the movies on this list, don't feel like I'm coming at you, because I'm not. This is just my opinion. This is just how I felt about these movies. And some of these movies I despised. But a lot of this is just having fun, talking about movies. I'd love to hear down in the comments what you guys thought of these. If you've seen any of these, if you like or dislike them, let me know down in the comments. I love hearing from you guys. But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for checking this out. If you enjoyed this, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and ding that little bell, because that is the best way to keep track of this channel. And when I post videos like this, and I post videos like this every single week, I also want to give a huge, massive, enormous thank you to the Ghost Pirate crew, to you guys over on Patreon, and to the channel members over here. You guys absolutely mean the world to me. And if you would like to help support this channel, help keep the lights on around here, there's a link to Patreon down in the description. Or if you want to become a channel member, help support the channel that way, there's a button right down there that says join. And like always, thank you so much for watching. Please crush that like button. And remember, guys, horror can be fun. If you enjoyed this, click right here to watch me talk about my 10 favorite independent horror movies of this year. And I'll see you guys next time.